Good afternoon, everyone. What an incredible conference we've been having going on so far, and there is so much more to go. I'm hearing some wonderful things about all the powerful breakout sessions. I hope that everybody's enjoying their time here today. That's my own fan club out there. My name is Kevin Padilla, and I'm from the Rotary Club of Placentia. I am currently the Regional Rotary Foundation Coordinator for Zone 26, and I'm a past District Governor from District 5320. So with that, I would like to get us started with bringing up we have a short presentation that we're going to be receiving as a declaration. Rudy Westerfeld.
Yeah, we've got to get Rudy up here because Rudy's the reason that I'm here. My name is Janice Rutherford. I am the county supervisor for the 2nd District of San Bernardino County, which includes where Rudy and Karen live. So they are my constituents, and I am so very proud of the work that they do to have envisioned the idea for this conference and to work so hard to bring it to fruition. It is not an easy task, but it is so necessary in the world that we live in. It is necessary because we have so many people in this community, in this state, in this country, and in this world who don't have any hope. And out of hopelessness comes trauma and conflict and depression and angst and health problems and war. And so part of our job as leaders in our community and as Rotarians is to give people hope. Really just at the one-on-one level, just on reaching out to those we see in our neighborhoods who are down on their luck or who haven't been blessed with the kind of families that can give them a vision of what their future holds. When people have hope, they can dream, they can work for peace, they can achieve things in their lives, positive things that then uplift others. This idea is one spoken off of by one of my favorite speakers and a person who does tremendous work in the area of peace. That's Father Greg Boyle with Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. Probably many of you, yeah. A tremendous human being. And he says that he has never met a person in jail or prison or a gang member who had hope. And so that's what he tries to do, is to connect with them on a one-on-one level and build around them a community that can help them hope. And that's what I think all of you are doing by being at this conference and by taking the skills and ideas that you learn here and going back and applying them all over the globe to grow hope and to build peace. And I commend you for that and wish you well. And I have today a resolution on behalf of me and my colleagues at the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors. For those of you who don't know, the largest county, not just in the United States, but in the entire world. And we are honored to have you host this conference here. And this recognizes the tremendous efforts, topics being studied, diverse audience assembled here, so that you all can go about and take this idea of a peace conference and turn it into peace in real life. So it's my pleasure to present this today. I thank you so very much for being here and for dedicating your time. And if Rudy's not going to make an appearance, I guess I'm going to hand it to someone else. But okay, he's coming. Don't fall. Oh, that's okay. All right, you come right here in the middle. You get in the middle, and I'm going to hand this to you.
Super. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate the county and all the great work you're doing. And you know, today that we had Jason Anderson here, our district attorney, and the anti-gang task force and the anti-human trafficking task force. And we're going to be Rotary across the Southland here, helping San Bernardino heal and fix some of those problems. But thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank
sir. Goodbye.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Retired Ambassador Mary Ann Peters is the CEO of the Carter Center since 2014. Ambassador Peters served as the provost of the U.S. Naval War College, Dean of Academics at College of International and Security Studies, at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies. She spent more than 30 years as a career diplomat with the U.S. Department of State, servicing in many roles, and received a Presidential Meritorious Service Award. Ambassador Peters is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and Women in International Security.
And Rotary.
And now she is a member of Rotary International. Let's give a warm welcome to Mary Ann Peters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Kevin, to Rudy, and to Rotary International for putting on this event, and to all of you who show you care about peace by showing up here. I'm delighted to be invited to participate in this panel, and I think you'll find that all four of the panelists bring different perspectives to our thinking about peace. As the CEO of the Carter Center, I'm naturally very proud of the Carter Center's motto, which is waging peace, fighting disease, and building hope. The term waging peace conveys something that I believe is too often overlooked, and that is that sadly, peace is not the default condition, and it must be fought for and won. So if we look at how the world is doing in terms of peace, one of the first indices that we look at is the number of people who die in conflicts. And I should say that my perspective, the perspective I bring to peace, is a traditional one about conflict within and among nations, and the way in which war shreds lives. So I have to say that in terms of conflict-related deaths, which, as I said, is a simple and not very sophisticated but somewhat telling index, we were doing quite well until recently. Deaths from conflicts declined after 1945 and declined again after the end of the Cold War, reaching their low point in 2005. But by 2016, that trend had been reversed, and we have seen in recent years a tenfold increase in battle-related deaths. And more countries are embroiled in conflict than at any time in the past 30 years. And that's why what I'd like to do this afternoon is to take a look at what we all need to know, what we all need to remember about peace in the 21st century. Because what it takes to make and sustain peace has evolved, precisely because conflict has changed in recent decades. And I've made a list of 10 things we all need to keep in mind as we wage peace in today's world. And number one is something that my boss, President Carter, often says, and that is peace first. Peace is much more than the absence of war. We all know that. And you'll hear tomorrow, I understand, from Steve Killalay, who founded the Institute for Economics and Peace and has identified the 8 pillars of a sustainable peace. But while lasting peace requires much more than an end to war, the war must end before we can turn our attention to building a peaceful future. People in the midst of war pray first for an end to violence. When the bullets fly and the bombs fall, all other human aspirations evaporate in the face of the need to survive and protect those we love. Fear becomes constant, jobs disappear, incomes plummet, food is scarce, infrastructure is destroyed, disease spreads, justice becomes a mockery, children can't go to school, and human rights become meaningless. So first, the violence must end. Peace first is the reason why the Carter Center works in some dangerous places around the world, first to end the fighting and then to help create conditions for lasting peace. Number 2 on my list of the top 10 is related to the need to stop the war first before you can build peace. And the second thing we need to remember is that waging peace can be hard and dangerous work, harder than waging war. One example from the Carter Center's work is our efforts as the independent observer of the implementation of the peace agreement in the African country of Mali, located, as you know, in the Sahel region, which is home to a number of lethal terrorist organizations. The UN has a peacekeeping mission in Mali, which is called MINUSMA. And MINUSMA is by far the most dangerous of the 14 ongoing UN peacekeeping missions. MINUSMA lost 22 soldiers in 2019, while the other 13 missions together only experienced 1 death. To do our job as the independent observer, Carter Center representatives must travel to all parts of Mali, and when they do so, they are escorted by MINUSMA soldiers. Nevertheless, I am always relieved when I hear that our folks have returned to the, relative safety of the capital city, Bamako. And what we do as the independent observer in this very dangerous environment is evaluate whether the parties to the peace agreement, the government, and 2 movements of armed groups are actually meeting the commitments they made in the 2015 peace accord. We never sugarcoat our findings, so I'll tell you that sadly in 2019, momentum around implementation declined. But we'll continue to press for progress in the interests of the people of Mali in this very dangerous place. The third thing we need to remember about peace is that it is vital to realizing human rights. War robs people of their rights, and the rights of women are the first to go. Rape becomes commonplace in war, and it's often used as a deliberate military tactic by one side or by all sides. Rape was used as a means of ethnic cleansing in Europe in the Balkan Wars of the early 1990s, and in wars in Sierra Leone and Liberia that began also in the 1990s. I was pleased to hear that last year the Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to Nadia Murad and Denis Mukwege for their efforts to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war in Iraq among the Yazidi minority and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But we must all keep in mind the human toll that war takes on everyone, but in some particularly horrific ways on women. Number 4 on my list is that peace is particularly fragile in the 21st century. Today's conflicts are particularly hard to resolve and persistent. That's because, in my view, these wars are not wars among countries fought for defined goals by relatively disciplined armies, such as World War II or the Korean War. Instead, these are civil wars, though outside actors often intervene on one side or the other. A good example is the conflict in Syria, which began in 2011 as a civil war. Over the years, a number of outside players, including Turkey, Iran, the United States, and Russia, have intervened to affect the outcomes. Conflicts like those in Yemen or the Democratic Republic of Congo and many other places have deep cultural, religious, and social dimensions that go well beyond the political ambitions or search for territory and resources that were the most frequent causes of war among nation states. And because these underlying causes of conflict are rarely addressed in peace agreements, the conflicts persist or recur even after an agreement has been signed. An example is the conflict in northeastern Congo, which has been going on for decades, bringing death, suffering, and economic devastation as all wars do. The Second Congo War began in 1998, and violence has continued there to this day, in spite of the signing of a peace agreement some years ago, I think in 2003. This war eventually drew in 8 or 9 other African countries and dozens of armed groups. It has taken millions of lives through disease and starvation, as well as through violence. But the sad fact is that a war that most of us have never even heard of has taken more lives than any war since World War II. And the conflict in the northeastern DRC is just one example of the persistence that typifies 21st century warfare. And I'm going to return to the DRC because, frankly, it's a good example of a terrible phenomenon. Now, as I said earlier, the Syrian conflict began in 2011. And though by now the Assad regime has won militarily in much of the country, 1/3 of Syrian territory is still not under government control, the economy is in shambles, and a sustainable solution remains out of reach. In Yemen, Somalia, Iraq, and many other places, we see this kind of persistent conflict. And so, my number 5 is that it is not a coincidence that the population of people displaced by war, refugees and internally displaced persons, is at record levels. 2 of my co-panelists are experts on refugees, and they will tell you much more than I can about the current crisis. But what I want to stress is that the crisis is actually a result of the persistence of conflict that I have just described. Because today's conflicts last so long, refugees have little prospect of returning home, and new refugees are added to those who cannot go back. Large numbers of refugees come from places suffering from long-term conflict, like Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Somalia, and others. The 6th thing I'd like all of us to remember is that the absence of peace affects all of us. Though the people who are caught in the war zones suffer much more, in today's globalized world, even faraway conflicts make all of us less safe. I'll give an example, harking back to the conflict in the northeastern Republic of Congo. Global health workers are desperately battling an outbreak of Ebola in that part of the world that began in August of 2018, and it has already cost more than 2,200 lives. It is no coincidence that Ebola is flourishing amidst the violence and instability that have plagued this region for more than 20 years. And violence and instability in the northeastern DRC create conditions for the spread of the virus into neighboring Uganda and Rwanda and beyond. UN and other interventions to end the violence have not succeeded in restoring peace to the region. Armed groups burn down clinics and attack health workers who are trying to trace the people who may be carrying the disease, which is an essential element in stopping its spread. In these circumstances, people in need of treatment are naturally afraid to travel. Supplies cannot get where they need to go, and basic precautions against the disease are overlooked. My view is that all of us owe a great debt to the health workers on the front lines against Ebola, but their job is made nearly impossible by conflict. If Ebola spreads to other parts of Africa or the world, it will be because of conflict, because those microbes can flourish in conflict zones that health workers cannot access. A very important fact we need to keep in mind is that bombs and mines can kill even decades after a conflict ends, and children are often the victims of this, what's called unexploded ordnance. That is my number 7. The Carter Center, as I said earlier, has been working to create conditions for peace in Syria for many years. When the conflict was at its height, we created a unique conflict mapping tool that allowed us to see where the fighting was most intense and to track the evolution of armed groups, which at one point numbered in the thousands. We shared this data with the UN, with our own government, and with humanitarian organizations so that they could deliver assistance within Syria more safely. And now, I'm delighted to say, we're using this same tool to help identify where unexploded landmines and bombs may be hiding and waiting to kill or maim innocent people. This uniquely rich Syrian conflict database that we have curated since 2012 documents more than 150,000 conflict events, and it is now being used to identify areas around Syria that are more likely to be contaminated by unexploded munitions. And again, I'm happy to report that at the end of this month, the Carter Center will be convening about 30 governmental and non-governmental institutions across multiple divides of the Syrian conflict to brainstorm on ways to collaborate and address this problem of unexploded mines and bombs in Syria. Again, that was number 7. The 8th point I want to remind you about is that the United States is at war right now. Though most of us feel we are at peace, in fact, the United States is at war with 7 countries: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, and Niger. And because these wars take place somewhere else, we feel at peace and we pay little attention to those wars, to the suffering they generate, or to the threat of sliding into war ourselves. You know, I personally would never argue that we never need to use military force, but I do believe that it should be the last resort. And that is something that most of the many military officers I know also believe. In fact, some of the most eloquent advocates for peace I have ever met are military officers, particularly those who served on the ground in either the Marines or the Army, and who served in Iraq or Afghanistan. And they came to the Naval War College, where I was working, as graduate students seeking to understand how to prioritize peace and use war only as a last resort. As is often the case, I think President Carter actually said it best. In accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002, he said, and I quote, "War may sometimes be a necessary evil, but no matter how necessary, it is always an evil, never a good." Number 9 harks back to what I said earlier about the persistence of conflict and the nature or the character of conflict. And that is that we still try to use the same process for making peace that we used in the 20th and prior centuries, and it's not working. In other words, peacemaking has not kept pace with the changes in the character of conflict. And one important reason why these conflicts are so hard to settle once and for all is that the wrong people are brought to the negotiating table once the fighting stops. There isn't much good to be said about major wars between or among countries, but there is one difference that affects the prospects for negotiating a lasting peace. In wars between countries, disciplined soldiers stop fighting when told to do so and hand the baton to politicians and diplomats to negotiate the peace. But in today's brutal and messy internal conflicts, the usual invitees to the peace table are the leaders of the armed factions who fought the war and probably started it, the men with the guns. And they come to the table for the same reason they took up arms in the first place, for the spoils of war: land, money, power, and sad to say, women. So the wrong men, the men of war, not the men of peace, are at the table, and the women are usually not there at all. And not surprisingly, it turns out this is not a good recipe for lasting peace. So number 9 is that we need to bring women to the peace table. Research, yes. Research has in fact shown that peace agreements negotiated with the participation of women are much more likely to succeed and to last than those negotiated without them. Finally, number 10 on my list is that today's conflicts, as I think I've described, are particularly brutal, and they create terrible trauma. Yet we think we can build peace without addressing the invisible wounds that millions have sustained that result in depression, PTSD, and other mental illnesses. The Carter Center pioneered a program to train mental health clinicians in post-war Liberia, a country that at the time had only 1 psychiatrist and 0 trained mental health clinicians. And that has, we believe that is an important element in explaining why Liberia has not, at least not yet, succumbed to a third civil war. So I believe we must understand that lasting peace cannot be built without addressing the deep mental and emotional wounds from violence and even torture. I think instinctively we know this is true. And we also have evidence that conflict recurs when these wounds are not addressed at the individual and community levels. So those are my top 10 things we need to keep in mind as we struggle to wage peace in the complicated environment of the 21st century. And I'd like to end by sharing a proverb I learned recently, and I'd like to teach it to all of you. It is in the Wolof language, which is spoken in Senegal, the Gambia, and Mauritania. The proverb is, in Wolof, Jam moy lip, and it means peace is everything. Try it with me. Jam moy lip. Jam moy lip. One more time. Jam moy lip. Peace is everything. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, one of these is mine, actually.
Yes.
I already drank from it.
So Ambassador Peters, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for making it out here, and we wish you continued success at the Carter Center.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Kat Graham, is an actress, singer, dancer, and producer. Her list of movie and television credits is very extensive. As a talented singer and music producer, Graham has released 2 albums. As a trained dancer, Graham has appeared in music videos of a myriad of artists. Pharrell, Missy Elliott, John Legend, Nelly, Diddy, and Usher. Born in Geneva, Graham speaks 4 languages and is a strong advocate of human rights, being particularly passionate about the plight of refugees worldwide. Graham became a high-profile supporter of United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees in 2013. And thankfully, she became a Goodwill Ambassador for Rotary International in 2019. With that, Kat Graham.
How's everyone feeling today? Now, this is Rotary. How you feeling? Come on, we're trying to change the world. So, today at lunch, I had lunch with a friend, and I actually wound up sitting next to a man. He was 96 years old, and he was a World War II survivor. Was in Germany at the time, and he survived. And I was having this moment when I looked at him, and we were having this conversation, and he told me that something that he wanted me to remember, because I didn't know how much longer he would have, or he didn't know. And he said, just have compassion for people. Have compassion. I want to read you my favorite poem, and it's a huge reason why I got involved in the work that I got involved in. You guys might know this one. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. What is so amazing about Rotary International is the community, the family that you guys have created that I'm now a part of, and the Rotary Wheel. When I asked what it was originally when I first got involved with Rotary, almost, what did we say, 2 years ago? That it needs other wheels to move, that we need each other to build this world into a more peaceful, more sustainable, more peaceful world. And that's why I love Rotary so much and the community that Rotary has. I've been working with the UN Refugee Agency since 2013, maybe 2012. I believe the first mission I had was 2013. That was when there was only one refugee camp for Syrian refugees in Jordan. They were hoping that the crisis would not get worse. It did. More camps were built, more people running, more people suffering. There are now more refugees than any time in history. I'm going to repeat that. There are now more refugees in the world than in any time in history. More than the aftermath of World War II, the previous high water mark. Crises are more protracted, and the response has had to evolve to keep pace. Entire generations are being born and raised in refugee camps. I remember when I was at, I think it was actually Rotary, that they said like a baby was born every 10 minutes or 10 seconds. It was mind-boggling. It's not just scary to hear about. It's terrifying, and it's not just for these children and these parents, but it would be terrifying for you and me. I was born in Geneva, Switzerland. My grandfather was a goodwill ambassador for the UN from Liberia to Switzerland and the Netherlands. He fled the Charles Taylor regime. He was lined up on the beach to be shot down. And he fled, and he survived. And thank God, because I wouldn't be here if he didn't. My mother comes from Israeli family, Russian, Polish. And so on both sides of my family, we are refugees. And I think a lot of people in this room might realize that they also come from immigration or refugees. So we should all be working to support and understand what we are really looking at in our own communities. For the most vulnerable ones, those who welcomed into communities around the world and here in the States, refugees add so much to a community. I think that there's this misconception that if you have an outsider entering into your home, that you might need to build a wall, protect yourself. You're not looking at what the possibilities are of what these incredible people can contribute. And I also think that people have this misconception, I even had it before I had met so many refugees, that they're students, they're shop owners, they have incredible jobs and capabilities, so much more than me. I sing, dance, and act, like that's it for me. But like there's so many more women especially that are, due to these circumstances, aren't giving the opportunities, and girls that can't get an education because they're just trying to make ends meet to help their families, so they can't even focus in school, or they're dealing with communities where their education is not necessarily being supported. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's really important that we, not just as a Rotary and UNHCR family get together, but that we raise our awareness for what kind of people like you and me, people that are brothers and sisters and fathers and bosses. You know, I just want us to work on changing how we view each other, period. How do you see each other? How do you see the person next to you? Do you see yourself in the person next to you? Okay. So UNHCR is focused on protecting people that have been forced to flee their homes. No one wants to be a refugee. You don't wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm just gonna leave everything I've ever known and not even be able to take any clothing because the journey ahead of me is so difficult and I'm going to have to drop my belongings on the way in order to pick up my child who is so exhausted that he might not make it. No one wants to be a refugee. Refugees are people forced to flee their homes. So UNHCR's mission is to ensure that the people in need are provided for. They're provided access to a safe territory, means to rebuild their lives in safety and dignity. 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 We went on a mission to Africa last year. I went with Rotary and also UNHCR, but on the Rotary end, I should have used the bathroom before we had started going into the camp. I forgot, and I winded up having to use the bathroom, and and when I tell you it was a hole in the ground, and I said, well, what about sanitation? Like, where's their toilet paper? We don't have any. I said, well, what about the water to wash my hands? There's barely enough water to drink, let alone to sanitize. And then we think about who we are as any women in the audience? You know, dignity and being able to take care of yourself and sanitation. Refugees do not want a handout. Every refugee person I have met has never asked me for a thing. In fact, it has all been about giving. I come into their caravans or tents, huts, whatever they have, and they're offering me tea, whatever they have, because of dignity. So when we talk about providing tools to help refugee women, IDPs, we want to give people tools to help rebuild their lives. That's why education is so important. That's why sustainability is so important. Filtration systems, agriculture, different ways that we can help provide support to these different communities, these different camps. The biggest misconception about refugees is that refugees are victims. My grandfather was not a victim. My grandmother was not a victim. And I think it's important that we understand that if somebody has the tools, they can help themselves and go back to their country with education that they maybe didn't have before, tools, skill sets that they didn't have before, and rebuild their country, that they can be the new leaders. I meet these children and they're so amazing and they're so loving, and I look into their eyes and being half Liberian and I look at these young children and I know that they are the future leaders. But if they don't have education, then they might not have a chance. Through my work with the UNHCR, I've been blessed to visit with women and young girls who have survived and are beginning to hope again. They're searching to rebuild their lives, and it's their way out. So I met this young girl. She was 16 years old. Her name is Bailan. She's in Ethiopia. She's a Somali refugee. She is one of really a few girls that are in this school. And I said, well, where are all the other girls? Well, you know, in the culture, education is not supported. They are told to stay home, have early marriages, and she is working against all odds, against cultural, against what she's and her family even has known, to make a difference. So she and her sister are hoping that they will be able to go to college. For me, I had kind of pie in the sky dreams. I had always dreamed of becoming a successful actress, and, you know, embarrassingly enough, I hadn't really made education as important as I should have. I didn't understand how important it was. I didn't understand that it equaled freedom. And when I looked into these young girls' eyes, I saw that education really absolutely equals freedom. And there are so many different tools that we can do to support that. What's really cool, amazing thing is that when we went to Uganda last year with Rotary, we went to Uganda. It was the first Rotary club that ever happened in a refugee camp ever, and they started it themselves. And I know they're not here, and I know they might not ever see this, but if we could just give a hand to those kids that are still in the camp. Because it's those kids, it's those people that want to make a difference in their community and don't want to wait for somebody to give them a handout. They just want to help themselves. And because of Rotary's structure, they make it, and the tools that they give you and the breakdown of how to get it done and the support and getting sponsored, it's just so perfectly engineered. So I'm really, really proud of those kids. So half of refugees are women and girls, their daughters. They could be your sisters, wives, mothers. And women, girls, they deserve better. Today's strong girls are tomorrow's strong women, and that's something that we all need. Invest in yourself. So refugees want a hand up. They do not want a handout. UNHCR is connecting communities, and they are growing support for refugees. And UNHCR is working with communities, obviously internationally, but very much so communities within the United States. And Trevor and I, I'm going to wrap this up, but Trevor and I will get into how you guys can get involved in that. But I just wanted to thank you guys for inviting me here to talk, and I appreciate it. Now we'll get into some Q&A. Yeah? Okay. Thank you guys so much. Coming to the stage. So I guess I get to do the introduction. Is that cool? Yeah? Okay. So UNHCR has this amazing group of really talented people working out of the Washington office. And one of them is amazing enough to be here today. Trevor Kincaid, can you come to the stage? Oh, you're over here. 1-1. Oh, yes. Oh, we're going to play a video. We're going to play a video for you.
I think that the biggest misconception about refugees is that they're victims. So many of these amazing refugees are just people like you and me that have absolute incredible capabilities to teach, to help support a community. If I was at the camp, that Aklima would be my boss and my best friend. I think she wanted to show herself that she was an equal and show herself that she could survive without a man. Okay, and these? What I've noticed is the resilience in so many of these women as they start off with what they have. She's like, I can make cakes. That's my skill set. I'm going to use what I have. And eventually people became so obsessed with their cakes that they were just like, you know what, why don't you open up your own restaurant? And she did. It's a remarkable story of integrity and girl power.
أنا waxaan jikadan kuleelka aan ugu jiro wadankan oo kulul anoo dhig kar qaba maskaxdayda macnaha way xamili la'dahay naftu uma ku sasabaya qaxooti haduu yahay waxaan jecelahay meel walbo aad tagto ama qaxooti ahaw ama ha ahaan meel walbo aad tagto inaad shaqaysato inaad ilmahaaga wax barato.
Kat, thank you for your remarks, and thank you for visiting the camp. I'm sure that was an amazing experience.
Yeah, it was great.
I guess first off, I was wondering, in the camp, you talked a little about misconceptions and things that you saw. what do we get wrong here? What is, so few of us, I think, probably have the opportunity to make a trip like you did. You know, what was one of the things that stood out that you wish you could just tell every single person here?
That we're all the same. I mean, I don't know that I can ever say it loud enough. I mean, we are so similar in so many different ways. I mean, a lot of the people that I've met, they don't speak English, but we laugh and we joke and we have a good time, and we, you know, humanity has to crack through and shine through any sort of religion or race, ethnicity, you know, that none of that actually matters. We are all made up of the same stardust, and I wish that, obviously everyone here is understanding of that, but we got to get that message out, I think, a bit more.
Yeah, yeah. There's sort of, with that, there's sort of two narratives in the world, I think, about refugees. And there's one that they are these victims that we have to help, and there's another that they overcome the odds to do great things. And especially this year, we'll probably hear more of that as we work to the Olympics and the refugee team and this and that. Which
That
narrative?
is, by the way, can you talk about that for just a quick second? Because I just found out about this and I'm blown away and I'm so excited about it. Just really quick.
Every year, the UN sponsors the refugee team at the Olympics, so we're looking forward to that, and we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff over the next year to celebrate their accomplishment.
I can't wait.
Which of those narratives, though, is right? Are they both right?
Well, I think, which is also a part of the misconception, is that everyone is an individual. Everyone has their own journey and their different stories, right? Like, I have my own issues, you have your own issues, and not every problem can be treated the same. So you can't just assume that if I just do this one thing, it's going to solve. You know, you just focus on that one person, that one girl that you meet, that one boy that you meet, and you make sure that you show love and compassion in whatever you can. I mean, in my case, my life's work is to share their stories, the stories of the voiceless. If I have a microphone and a camera in my face, like, you know, that's my duty. So I think every narrative is right. If it's somebody's experience, it's right.
That's a great point. You do have a microphone and this voice that's unique. And I think people in your position have found different ways to use it, whether or not that's on the climate or water or other issues at this time. Why refugees for you?
You know, I hadn't realized it until I went to the headquarters in Geneva, and I hadn't been back there since I was born. And I had this moment, shout out to Dana Hughes, who was like, "Why are you crying? It's just a building." And I remember, because my parents had walked through, the different steps in Geneva, and I hadn't been there since I was born. And I had realized I've kind of come full circle, that this is just where I was always supposed to work with the UNHCR, and it was always a part of my destiny. So I also still feel, in a way, that it wouldn't have just been one trip. I had met with someone who was from Haiti and had helped, been rebuilding the situation over there and helping rebuild the communities and the structure. And he had said to me, well, this is who you are. This is what you're supposed to be doing. I was like, I'm an actress. Because he didn't know who I was or what I did, and I'm not about to, like, embarrass myself. And he was like, no, you're not that.
Yeah.
This is what you are.
Yeah.
You know.
And you have a unique position because you have a formal capacity that you do with Rotary and
Yeah.
one that you do with UNHCR.
Yeah, I mean, my focus with Rotary, obviously, my number one mission has been to give voices to IDPs and refugees. But what's been so amazing about Rotary is, we do focus a lot on women and telling stories about women and empowering women, and that has been such a amazing opportunity to have with them, that we are able to do so much. And there's so many different clubs within Rotary that I'm passionate about, that I want to help support. And being an ambassador for you guys is amazing, because I can highlight maybe smaller organizations within Rotary, smaller clubs, and be able to give them a light and help them have more awareness to what they're building. So it's great.
So one last question. I know you're probably familiar with the crook off the stage or the music
The
at
frog.
the Oscars.
Where's the frog?
Yeah. I hope that through your remarks and being here, some folks are more interested or inspired to get involved with UNHCR.
Yes.
How can they do that when they go home?
Well, I know that UNHCR has a new program called Cities with Refugees, and that if they want to get involved in it, that you do have a booth, and that you're going to be speaking tomorrow at 2. So that's a great way, but I'll definitely be talking more about it online and on my Insta and all that, but I'm sure like if you go to unhcr.org, you can find more information about that, or track him down, he'll tell you all about it. But what it basically does is it will help you within your city find different ways to welcome and support refugees, which I think is really important.
All right, well, thank you, Kat. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, thank
Yep.
you. Are you the frog?
I am. I'm the frog. I'm the one who gave you the hook. Kat, I wanted to give you this.
What is this?
It's just a little memento to thank you for coming and talking to us today and being here tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
I want to say I appreciate all you've done already to help the refugees, and I hope that you continue in the future and have good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
All right, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Darren Moss was a member of the inaugural Rotary World Peace Fellowship class of 2002. He worked as a teacher, lawyer, and a political advisor before joining the United Nations. Peacekeeping missions in Timor-Leste, then Afghanistan, and then having moved to New York, he continued his peace-building efforts with the United Nations in several roles. Darren is a playwright in his spare time, and in 2015, Darren's first play regarding late Abel was selected as part of the New York International Fringe Festival. In his second show, The Cooperative again sold out its run as part of the 2016 festival. So please give a warm welcome to Darren Moss.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say that I'm technologically advanced, but really I just couldn't find a printer, so we'll box on. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Kevin, and the many esteemed guests, and a huge thanks, of course, to my fellow panelists for allowing me to bask, at least momentarily, in their combined excellence. To the district governors and the past district governors and the district governors-elect, to the Rotaractors, the Interactors and their beautiful benefactors, to the precinct presidents, the treasured treasurers, the alarmed becalmed but not quite embalmed sergeants-at-arms, to the deep south, the true north, the far east, the midwest, the red states, the blue states, the hot dates, the old mates, the peace lovers, the sisters and brothers, the old friends, old supporters, new friends and new supporters of Rotary World Peace Fellows, and all those who gather for cause and not for an applause, and most of all, ladies and gentlemen, to you, each and every one, Rotarian friends and friends of Rotary, to those here that go above and beyond at every turn, the selfless few who do what they do, the workers, not the shirkers, you're out there, they're amongst us, they're here this afternoon, they're probably sitting beside you. If they are beside you, you should be beside yourself because you're magnificent, and give yourselves a hand because you don't have a leg to stand on. Good afternoon. I will note first by way of disclaimer that the views I expressed this afternoon are my own and are not official positions of the UN, but hopefully they're at least fairly close together. And secondly, by way of very brief background, I graduated, I think has been said, from law school in '98 and from the University of North Carolina in 2004. Along the way, I've worked in courts, in counterterrorism, and in anti-corruption. I've been a lawyer, a political advisor, and a humanitarian. I was a teacher for 4 years. I worked in Afghanistan for 2 years, and I was arrested in the Ukraine once. In that time, I have learned 3 things and 3 things only. That is, 1, that kids are honest, devious, and hilarious. 2, that I have a genetic inability to grow convincing sideburns. And 3, that the Ukrainian police have absolutely no sense of humor whatsoever about their hats. I worked as a legal advisor for the Timorese police, where the official mascot was literally a crocodile outside my office. I have worked in the far north of Afghanistan providing political advice to local officials and moonlighting warlords in much the same way that a Jack Russell provides financial advice to a burglar, that is loudly and mostly in terror. And I currently work supporting the coordination of humanitarian assistance in Myanmar, where just over 2 years ago unspeakable violence drove about 750,000 people across the border and to flee their homes. And I guess in the context of today, I in particular had the great honor, as has been said, of being amongst the first class of the Rotary World Peace Fellows starting in 2002, which is an extraordinary program, if for nothing else than it brought UNC and Duke together academically with the same camaraderie that they came together in misery last year when they were both knocked out of the March Madness. Big hopes for this year. I do fear, ladies and gentlemen, I come here as something of a herald of doom, but having accepted that reality myself, hopefully I can at least make it interesting for a few minutes. Because there is little doubt, I think, in anybody's mind that we live in contested times. We are told frequently that we live in this binary world, that we must be for or we will be against, that we must be a winner or we'll be a loser, that we must be us or we will be them. We live in a world of contracting vision. We're an age of looking away from the world, of looking outside our windows and looking down into the black mirrored void of our phone in the hope that somehow salvation lies therein. Despite a very slight uptick in the level of peace in the world in 2019, according to the Global Peace Index, and for those statisticians amongst you, it was 0.09% on average improvement, but I'll take it, that's good enough. There are massive challenges that still face us as a species and as a planet, and humanitarian need for 2020 is at an all-time high. This year, more than 167 million people across the world need humanitarian assistance and protection. If all of those people were in a single country, it would be the 8th largest country on the planet. As both Ambassador Peter and Kat have flagged, displacement is at an all-time high, with more than 70 million people across the globe displaced from their homes, including 26 million refugees and more than 41 million internally displaced people. And children under the age of 18 make up 1/3 of the world's population, but they account for half of all refugees and around 40% of all of the IDPs who have been displaced by conflict and violence. Resource requirements to meet that particular level of need are also at an all-time high. In order to provide life-saving assistance to the 108 million most at-risk people, we are asking this year, the United Nations is asking this year for $28.8 billion. In effect, that means the 8th largest nation in the world is asking for an operating budget just for the bare life's necessities of the 98th sized global economy. So just quickly to put that $28.8 billion, it's a big number, I certainly don't have it in my back pocket, just to put that $28.8 billion in context, it's worth understanding that McDonald's annual operating budget is somewhere north of $17 billion, that America spends $31 billion every year on flowers, and twice that, $62 billion each year on pets. And the US defense budget is $686 billion, and global military expenditure is $1,868 million, or billion dollars, or $1.8 trillion. So just over 2% of global GDP is being asked for the just over 2% of global GDP is being spent on military and violence, and the ask in order to assist those 167 million people is 0.03% of total global GDP. You never thought numbers would be so exciting at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, but we're going to get there. So this, ladies and gentlemen, does seem to be the new and terrifying normal. It appears now we have more conflicts, more people in need, it's more difficult, a more dangerous operating environment, more complex, more interlinked challenges. And to be frank, let's be honest, this takes place in a world that at least in parts is drifting away from multilateral cooperation and intervention. And what is doubly troubling is many of the challenges we face, and as has been outlined by speakers previously, things like climate change, pandemics, natural disasters, terrorism. These are all challenges that no one nation alone can actually address. So if that is the contest of our times, and it's only one that we if we adopt a community perspective, a Rotary worldview, a view that is outward and not relentlessly in, only if we adopt that particular worldview can we actually address it. If the enormous, thank you, if the enormous challenges, I totally agree, if the challenges we face are the elephant in the room, then what we cannot do is risk being the apocryphal 5 blind men who are all going to describe that particular elephant based upon their immediate touch. One takes the trunk and he thinks it's a snake, one takes an ear and he declares that he's holding a fan, one takes a leg as a tree, a tail as a rope, the tusk as a spear, and then the fighting over the nature of the beast actually begins. Instead, what we need to do is to step back and foster a capacity to communicate, to coordinate, and to bring together our communities to address these seemingly insurmountable challenges. And trust me when I say building peace is the biggest challenge we have. Early last year, I returned from about 5 months in Myanmar, leading the coordination of humanitarian operations by the UN and our humanitarian partners in Rakhine State in the west of the country. As a very, very quick primer, Rakhine was where in late 2017 more than 750,000 people, the vast majority of them were the Rohingya Muslims, were driven from their home by an unspeakable campaign of brutal violence, rape and murder that has been described by senior officials as at the very least akin to ethnic cleansing and possibly genocide. To give a very quick sense of the scope and the scale, in the space of about 3 months, a city the size of Seattle fled Myanmar en masse, crossed a river carrying only what possessions they could grab when they fled, and set up camp in the once forested and now muddy hills of a former elephant reserve just outside Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And when you add in the host communities and then those who fled in subsequent months, that is now about the size of Dallas, the 9th largest city in the United States, of around 1.3 million people, more than half of whom are children. This is a population that every single day requires more than 400 tons of food a day, that requires 16 million litres or 4.2 million gallons of safe, clean drinking water. That's about 6.5 Olympic swimming pools of water a day just to survive. There are 50,000 latrines that need to be emptied of more than 420,000 kilograms or 926 pounds of solid waste. That's about 320 Toyota Corollas per day. And then you add onto that the need of protection, the protection services that need to be provided to about 144,000 single mothers, 22,000 children who are at high risk, and about 6,000 unaccompanied children who have no parents, no family, who fled by themselves, and then obstetric services for about 50,000 pregnant women on any given day. This is, to be an understatement, a near impossible challenge. But rather than focus on that part of my experience and the macro and the numbers that almost become so large as to become meaningless, I thought I'd share with you one smaller story and one more personal experience from my time in Myanmar. I was meeting on the ground floor of a home in what's called the Almingala ward, which is a small area that sits near the center of Sitwe, which is the capital of Rakhine. The Rohingya people are viewed, for those who've probably followed this a little bit in the news, are viewed by the Myanmar government as effectively non-citizens. And those who remain in Rakhine are stateless. They're isolated and they're largely denied basic access to services such as education and healthcare by the government. There are more than 130,000 Rohingya that are confined or imprisoned in what are in effect internment camps. Within this environment, our Mingala ward is an even stranger and perhaps more horrifically perverse kind of creation. When violence broke out in 2012 in Sitwe, the 4,000 residents of our Mingala ward, which is just a tiny set of sort of 8 streets by 8 streets, were all basically confined to their homes, and the government cut off access to the rest of the outside world on the 8 street exits that entered that particular suburb, put up police posts and barbed wire, and for the last 8 years, those 4,000 people have not been allowed to leave. They haven't even been allowed to go back to their shops, which are literally 1 street away from where they're now confined. These people sit about a quarter of a mile from where my office was, invisible, ignored, a community within a community. And I'd gone there on this particular day to talk to them about their situation, to see what they needed and to see what their views are and what the future might have held. Invariably, as over tea and discussion, the conversation turned to what they saw were the larger issues in Myanmar that had driven and continue to drive the hatred and division between different communities. And I asked the community leader at that particular point for a really frank assessment of what the relations between the communities in Rakhine were like. And my host looked at me, and he looked up at the ceiling, and he looked back at his hands, and he looked outside the front door where there was an armed Myanmar police officer just loitering about coincidentally. And then he said, when a body is injured, perhaps it's the arm, perhaps it's the leg, it can take some time, but eventually it will mend. It may not be quick, but it will mend. But when the body is injured more seriously, it takes a lot of time. And I nodded, and he paused, and he looked back down at his hands as this was then being translated. And then he raised his head and he looked at me and he said, but this, gesturing to the world around him, this is not injury, this is cancer. And there wasn't really anything at that point in the conversation that I had left to say. And I raise this point and this story because it's incredibly easy to forget the kind of human challenge that we are facing, that we are trying through this conference, through the work of Rotary, through the work of everybody here with the stall next door, that we are trying to overcome. It is immensely difficult. It is fiendishly frustrating, probably foolishly difficult. It is curing a form of cancer that permeates the soul, twists the good into the horrific, corrupts and corrodes our very sense of community. It's ugly, and it can't be fought with ordinary weapons. In fact, really, it can't be fought at all. It can only be changed, convinced, cajoled, and communicated with. In my experience in Myanmar and Afghanistan and in the often hushed hallways of the UN in New York, the only investment that can succeed in this process is an investment in people, in individuals who are committed to the challenges that lie ahead, arming them with knowledge, with empathy, with humility, with humanity, with commitment, and with courage in order to respond. If ever there was a time that we needed to set a course for education and for openness, for dialogue and for peace, then that time is most certainly now. And our vision can't be down at the soles, down at our shoes and our feet. It must chart a course for a journey that no one has yet taken, for a destination that no one has yet reached. And it must surpass our expectations, upend our existing thinking, reject comfortable rest, and challenge us to create a future that we will probably not actually see ourselves. In short, Rotary's and our collective reach for peace must exceed our grasp, else what's a heaven for? We face a world, and I promise I'll start to wrap it up soon. We face a world that is in certain parts trending away from this, unfortunately. It's trending away from being open and humane and thoughtful, from engaging with our neighbours. We're at this hinge point in history where the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and even more troublingly, the chasm between the humane and the inhumane is this widening gyre that certainly threatens to engulf us all. But we will never be able to address that issue if we become as small and as scared as we constantly get told we should be. Less aid funding, more fear of foreigners, more fear of immigrants, more fear of refugees, marginalisation of those that are different, whether it's their skin, their sexuality, their faith, their future, something that fails to fit into our own worldview. Embracing this nationalist, jingoistic rhetoric and a viewpoint of the world that seeks to exclude rather than to embrace. Our lives collectively and individually do not become better when we make them smaller. We are not safer just because we feel stronger. We're not richer just because we have more money. Our collective ambition has to be more than smaller, stronger, and richer. Such an approach as a person, as a community, as a country, as a society, as a civilization is doomed to end in isolation, ashes, and sadness. I have sat with Taliban affiliates, I've sat with victims of abuse, with diplomats, with politicians, with people who've lost everything and everyone, and with the people who have taken it away. And the message that always rings clearest in my mind at the end of these interactions is be more humane, Be more open, be more tolerant, be more principled. Don't sit on the sidelines when you need to stand on the court for something. Don't be told that the other, the alien, the foreign, the different, the lame, the lepers, the losers, the tired, the hungry, the poor, the weak, the lost, the lonely, that somehow they're not as good, they're not as worthy, they're not as important as you are. Be left-wing, be right-wing, but just don't forget that both wings are attached to the same damn bird. And finally, at a time when 167 million of our neighbours, of our brothers and sisters, are in dire need of life-saving support, we must not walk away in fear, obsessed with those tiny few differences that divide us rather than bring us together. And so the final thing that I'll say is this, and I'll end as I have in the past, I apologise. I end as I will in the past with a very short Emo Phillips story. And apologies if you've heard it, but it's about a man walking across a bridge, coming across another man who was about to jump off. And so I ran over and I said, look, stop, don't do it, don't jump. And he said, why shouldn't I? And I said, well, there's so much to live for. And he said, like what? And I said, well, are you religious or are you atheist? He said, religious. I said, me too. Are you Christian or are you Buddhist? He said, Christian. Oh, I said, me too. Are you Catholic or are you Protestant? He said, Protestant. I said, me too. Are you Episcopalian or are you Baptist? He said, Baptist. I said, Mao, me too. Are you Baptist Church of God or Baptist Church of the Lord? He said, Baptist Church of God. I said, me too. Are you Original Baptist Church of God or you Reformed Baptist Church of God? He said, Reformed Baptist Church of God. I said, me too. I said, are you Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1879, or Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1915? He said, Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1915. And I said, die, heretic scum, and I pushed him off. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you and commend you all for this great effort in working towards peace. I want to ask you to continue to expand your communities, to search for those difficult answers to the impossible questions, and whether you are, for the sake of your children and your children's children who will inherit our successes and our failures by magnitudes of orders of difference, to continue to embrace the true believers, the heretic scum, and everybody in between. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Darren. I really appreciate you coming in here tonight and talking to us. But most importantly, I want to thank you for being one of our original Rotary Peace Fellows. It's really a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our next speaker, Dr. Jude Caravan, is a cosmologist, planetarian, healer, futurist, author, and previously one of the most senior businesswomen in the United Kingdom. She has a master's degree in physics from Oxford University, specializing in quantum physics and cosmology, and a doctorate in archaeology from the University of Redlands, researching ancient cosmologies. She has traveled to nearly 80 countries, worked with wisdom keepers from many traditions, and been a lifelong researcher into the scientific and experimental understanding of the nature of reality. Dr. Jude Caravan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. And thank you, dear Rudy, for inviting me here, if nothing else, to help me escape from Brexit. So, much appreciated. You might ask, why did Rudy invite a cosmologist to this amazing gathering? And I don't know, actually. But hopefully by the end of my 20 minutes or so, we'll have some perhaps idea. I grew up the daughter and granddaughter of a coal miner in the north of England. And at 4 years old, with that environment, I fell in love with the universe. I looked up and saw stars and wondered. I looked around me at trees and wondered. And I also started to hear voices. I started to have precognitive dreams. I started to spontaneously move out of my body. And that didn't quite seem normal for what I was surrounded by. But actually, I realized that it was the first steps of a lifelong journey to try and understand the deeper and bigger nature of reality itself. And what I found when I was growing up and my teachers were teaching me, and what I found at Oxford University, where my teachers were teaching me, is that what they were teaching me bore no relevance or reference whatsoever into how I was experiencing the wider, greater sense of reality. And so that search for understanding has been my lifelong quest. And in that lifelong quest, it's been a very scenic route. You know, I was the most senior businesswoman in the UK for a brief, shining moment. But also many other threads of my journey. And one of those threads has been as a healer, and how we, all of us, hold so much trauma, and to try and understand why we hold so much trauma. And what I found was that my quest to understand the nature of reality and my quest to understand why we hold trauma seemed to be having the same cause. And I'd like to share with you what I feel that cause is, because it seems to me that in our collective trauma is expressed perhaps most dysfunctionally through conflict. And not just conflict with each other, which we've heard some amazing articulation today, but actually conflict between we as a human species and our planetary home and all her children. So this goes wider than the small conflicts we have with our neighbors, the bigger conflicts we have, the wars we have. It's literally a trauma that plays it out itself in these behaviors that give rise to conflicts, that give rise to inequality, that give rise to all the things that my esteemed colleagues and fellow speakers have been talking about today. So I've entitled what I'm going to share with you, From Pieces to Peace, the new science of consciousness and how it might be able to help the world. And this really comes back to, I think, a saying of Albert Einstein, when he said that when you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome, it's the essence of madness. And that, it seems to me, what we've been doing. But we're doing these things again and again and again because we have a basic misperception of who we are and what the world is. All Rotary's commitments, action-based commitments, that's what I love about Rotary. This is not a talking shop. This is an action-based, heart-based way of serving the greater good. But all of Rotary's commitments actually aim to resolve not only the underlying causes of issues, as well as minimizing their adverse impacts. So the successful campaign to eradicate polio was supported by medical science, both to heal the cause, which in many cases was the socio-economic, cultural environments that gave rise to it, as well as to cure the symptoms. And crucially, we relied on science to help us through that. And by science, I mean science in its widest sense. I mean, instead of subjective opinion, what are the facts? What's playing out here? How is this working through? So its work for peace, I believe, can also be empowered and facilitated by science, but not the science, the old paradigm of science, which I'll come on to, but an emergent new science of the 21st century, and crucially, an integral science. There's a wonderful saying by the Chinese sage Lao Tzu that is a lot of levels, but essentially there can be no peace in the world unless there is peace in the heart, and every level between. So what I perceive is that the collective dis-ease we suffer from, that gives rise to all our dysfunctional behaviors, and including and especially conflicts of all sorts, is ultimately our fragmented perception of the nature of reality itself. Until recently, mainstream science has maintained that the only reality is this physical realm, and that it is a realm of separation. You are separate from me. I am separate from the earth. The earth is separate from the sun, and throughout our entire universe. And that's essentially been the basic methodology of scientific research. And it's brought incredible progress through our technologies, through medical science, through many, many, many different ways. But essentially, what it said is that, therefore, not only is the material world a world of separation, it's also a random world. It's not a world with intrinsic meaning. And that mind and consciousness are something that really arises from the brain and as a result of 13.8 billion years of random mutations. Can I swear? This is bullshit. It is total BS. And the point now is that we have the evidence to show that it's BS. But it's not just BS, it's dangerous BS. Because that supports that sense that mainstream science has all the answers, is telling us that we're all separate from each other. That what we feel in our hearts in terms of what Kat was talking about is when she feels when she goes to a refugee camp, or what Darren feels, what everybody feels, what we feel from love, yeah, no, that's just imagination. It's not real. Well, it is real. What is not real is the old paradigm that's convinced us that the myth of separation is real. But now, at this 11th hour, 59th minute, when all that we've heard today shows us we're at this pivotal point of breakdown and potential breakthrough, a radically different understanding is emerging. And it's based on scientific evidence. And at its very, very foundation, it's showing that mind and consciousness is not something we have, but literally what we and the whole world are. That our universe is not a great thing. It is essentially, as the great Victorian scientist Sir James Jean said, rather a great thought. A great thought in the infinite, eternal mind of the cosmos. What this is revealing is that the physical realm exists and evolves as the manifestation of a deeper, unified and vitally, meaningfully informational reality. It's exquisitely set up, incredibly fine-tuned as a universe to exist from simplicity, to evolve from simplicity to complexity. Someone said earlier, I think it was Kat, that we're stardust and we know this. And if that was the case, you know, you could argue we're about, 5 billion years old, which is old enough. But actually, the hydrogen of the water of our bodies is as old as the universe itself. Yeah? We go back further than stars. We go back to the get-go. We are the inheritors of 13.8 billion years of a universe that literally is so exquisitely set up. It doesn't just exist and evolve as a unified entity. It has an innate evolutionary impulse. I could stand up here and you'd fall asleep very quickly. But my next book's called Gaia, Her Story, and it's the story of a living planet, a living and evolving planet in a living, evolving universe, and the amazing nature of relationships and dynamic relationships and profound interconnectedness of all that we call this is extraordinarily wonderful. And it arises from these deeper, superphysical, non-physical realms of causation and purpose, this informational realm of cosmic consciousness. And not only does our universe have this wonderful evolutionary impulse, we are part of that evolutionary impulse. So if our universe has meaning and purpose, then we have meaning and purpose. And we are the privileged inheritor of 13.8 billion years of this incredible process. And we stand here together at this pivotal moment where our misunderstanding, our fragmented perception of the nature of reality has brought us to the brink of extinction, potentially. And where we're actually undergoing the 6th major extinction that our planet has gone through since its birth. And we're the ones pretty much who are causing it. By environmental damage, by climate change, of all sorts, but of deforestation, of decimating the environment, for which all the complexity, the universe goes from simplicity to complexity for a reason. I think it wants to know itself. I think it likes to experience and learn and explore. But it's the diversity and the wondrous diversity that gives our beautiful planetary home its resilience, that it can live within and learn within and evolve within. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. Nature is us, and we are all part of this living system within an evolving universe. The evidence for this is showing up across literally all scales of existence and numerous fields of research. I mean, cosmologically, just to give 2 very brief examples. In 2017, we found that when we look at the relic radiation that fills all of space, but that actually came into being only 400,000 years after the beginning of our universe, we find patterns of slight differences in temperature. And those patterns and those slight differences in temperature are called fractals. And we find them from the atomic scale to the planetary scale, to the scale of our solar system, to the galactic scale. And in 2017, we found them at the cosmological scale, filling all of space. And the other thing that this is so exciting, I feel, is that this emerging evidence is actually providing a natural framework for the sort of experiences that often we only sort of sidle up to people at the end of a party in a corner and say, I had an out-of-body experience, or an angel spoke to me, or I had a telepathic communication, or I had a precognitive dream. I mean, let's get brave, people. How many people have had those sort of experiences? Look around us. How common they are. Well, mainstream science in the old paradigm shushes that. A friend of mine is Eben Alexander, who was a neurosurgeon. People used to have near-death experiences, tell him all sorts of stuff, and he'd pat them on the shoulder and say, yes, yes, dear, but you're imagining things. And then he had meningitis of the brain, and he had a near-death experience, and it transformed his life, because what he realized was that what he was experiencing is what they were experiencing. We also find in human behaviors these patterns. After the Second World War, Lewis Richardson analyzed hundreds of human conflicts over 300 years, and he plotted them in terms of the scale of damage, deaths, fatalities, destruction against their frequency. And he found a relationship, a straight line, showing that a larger conflict, about twice the size, was 4 times less likely to happen. That of itself is weird, that there's a relationship between hundreds and hundreds of human conflicts. But even weirder is that when seismologists were analyzing earthquakes and looking at the scale and destructive power of earthquakes and their frequency, they found exactly the same relationship. In other words, the underlying patterns of complex behaviors are the same, rising from the appearance of, emerges from these deeper, essentially pre-physical, what's called attractors. The crucial thing is, if we can co-create an attractor for war, we can co-create an attractor for peace. And this new science of consciousness is a science of love. It's revealing the profound interconnectedness. Again, Kat was saying in the refugee camps, when you look at someone, do you see yourself reflected in their eyes? We're all uniquely different, but we're all the same. We're all part of this oneness of the whole world. And this
I have
offers
great
us
news for you. A question and an invitation.
There's a small video.
Leading edge science at all scales of existence is revealing a radical new vision of the world. Instead of its material and separate appearance, our universe is not only fundamentally interconnected, but exists and evolves as a unified entity, made up of universal information and holographically manifested, literally a cosmic hologram. It's a great thought rather than a great thing. The question is, are you ready for a wonderful adventure of self-discovery that can transform the world? And if so, I invite you to share and live this new vision of unity. We're at a threshold we've never been before. We're the first of our species capable of conscious evolution. But we also hold the ability to destroy ourselves and everything else, to evolve and thrive, or to collapse and even become extinct. All our tomorrows are at stake. Our harmful behaviours, our conflicts and exploitations of people and planet all come from the seeming separation of ourselves with each other and with the world around us. As it turns out, the cause is an illusion. The cosmic hologram model and its whole world view provides us with clear facts and undeniable science that we're all part of the same grand thought, of the same intention of cosmic mind. We're discovering that consciousness isn't something we have, but what we and everything else are. The separation between you and me, between us and our planet, between our planet and the entire universe is illusory. What this means is that I cannot any longer ignore your pain and your problems because they affect a part of me that I've refused to see until now. I affect you and you affect me. I can choose love and a deeper connection with you. We can choose unity and higher possibility for everyone. Together, we can choose to shape a new story for humanity and our planet and turn it into a future that's bold, exciting, and flourishing for all. Conscious evolution. We can change all of our tomorrows right now.
So what we've been doing, having sort of co-founded, I thought I was writing a book, turned out I was co-founding a movement for this message, for a whole worldview message. And it's very much, as Rotary is, a message of hope in action. It offers us a unifying framework where we can expand the spiral of compassion from the me to include the we and the all. And it's very much about understanding and experiencing and embodying such unity awareness. And it moves us dynamically. Most of you probably know this idea of act local, think global. Well, we've sort of moved it on a page to act local, feel global, think cosmic. Because this is therefore the big picture framework that we can, all that we do within. When we come from a perspective of separation and we try and help, we try and collaborate, we do all the things that Rotary do so amazingly, and all the speakers that have spoken today do so amazingly. If we're still coming from the basic premise of separation, coming together as an aspiration, but it's an aspiration against a framework that's telling us all the time that we are separate. What this now is giving us the evidence for is back to the BS. That isn't reality. Reality is unified, but it's not uniform. It expresses itself through radical diversity. And so as we come into this perspective, you know, it offers us an opportunity to grow up, to wake up, to grow up, to clean up our traumas, because there's a home coming into that sense of oneness, and then to show up. And when we do that, we can do what Rotary already have been doing wonderfully, which is link up and lift up. Thinking cosmic, I'll go through these so quickly because I know the frog's going to arrive any second. But this is where thinking cosmic is crucial, because if we don't begin to sort of be in this sense of unity and unity awareness, then we're still where we were, and we'll still be running around, and we still will not be where we need to be as a species if we are to survive and thrive and begin to heal our relationship with our planetary home and all her children. We're all indigenous to Earth. We're all Gaia's children. And with this framework, we can remember that. As indigenous folks, you know, have never forgotten, but we're all indigenous. So it's an opportunity to remember. And as Rotary does so brilliantly also, is to act local. Sacred normalcy. You know, many, many years ago, I got some words given me in a beautiful field near Avebury, England, where I live. In the commonality of our humanity, we're all ordinary. In the commonality of our divinity, we're all extraordinary. So, to finish really, Rotary International already acts local and feels global. And now, thanks to Rudy's invitation, if I haven't outstayed my welcome, I really invite Rotary to be co-creative partners in actually taking us to this bigger picture. Because unless we heal our worldview, our fractured worldview, I don't see how we can heal our behaviors. We literally need to re-story to restore. So peace is the most natural and tangible outcome of unity awareness. And I just invite us all on this great adventure, because adventure it is. And it's a journey that, you know, Darren says, you know, we may not see it in our lifetime, but let's take the steps. Let's begin this journey together and link up and lift up and see where it takes us. So thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, that's so kind. Thank you.
Dr. Caravan, I want to thank you very much for coming out and giving us a great presentation this evening, and wish you well in your journey back home.
Thank you very much. Well, at least I know what the time is. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, everyone. We have one more speaker. Just kidding. All right, if there's anybody here from the former Peace Corps volunteer, we're asking, or the booth is asking for you to go into the House of Friendship right after this session. I have some really good news for you. The bar opened 2 minutes ago, so right outside the door. The dinner will be at 6:30, and our exhibitors in the House of Friendship would love to see you all, so please drop by and see them. They're open until 6:30, and we will see you tomorrow morning. This session number 4 begins at 8:30. Registration opens at 7:30. So please all have a great evening. Thank you very much.